Jealousy is a topic that gets intense. It's one of those topics, as I started preparing it for today, I thought, well, this will be easy. It's a little about relationships and a little interpersonal stuff. And the more I dealt with it, the more I became aware that this topic actually is a tough one, because it's inseparable from other parts of our being. Maybe you're thinking about this question. I did a little survey. What is jealousy? Why are we interested in it? The question that came up most was, how can I tell the difference between good and bad jealousy? So how much jealousy is still normal and where does it get unhealthy? That's a fair question, and I also want to start with it. In the first 15 minutes or so, we will focus more on the subject jealousy in a relationship. How do I know what is healthy and what isn't? But then I want to go deeper, because jealousy has to do with deeper things. We'll go all into the deep stuff, especially in the second half. And if you're ready now and haven't had enough yet, you can fasten your seatbelt and get ready for a topic that concerns every human being to some degree. And if you personally are affected by it in your relationship because you're jealous or your partner is very jealous, then you know that it can really hit your inner substance. And yet jealousy isn't altogether bad. So many people have these questions, how is it? I mean, there's situations if you wouldn't get jealous, it would be strange. Like if my partner was making out with another person right in front of me, it would be weird if I then said, well, dear, if that's okay for you, then it's fine, all good. That would somehow be strange. In German, jealousy literally is passion addiction, very negative. We have a funny saying, jealousy is the passion that seeks passionately what causes pain. Sound familiar? Or jealousy is an addiction. So addiction doesn't sound good. Who likes to get jealous? I mean, you're just jealous. It sounds negative. The interesting thing is, if you look at other languages, including old languages, jealousy isn't only negative. I looked it up in two classic old languages. One is ancient Greek, the other ancient Hebrew. Both have words that aren't just negative. In Old Hebrew, the word they use is kinea. This is how you spell it. It means to strive for, what could also be positive, like I strive for your love. And the same goes for the Greek. Zalos means zeal. So jealousy has to do with zeal. And zeal is a good thing per se. Zeal could also just mean, this relationship is so important to me, so important that I don't want anything to come between us. That's the positive part of this. And we will look at what are the positive aspects of jealousy, and how can you tell that you are jealous in a good way. And then the second part, for example, in Latin, that gets a bit more complicated. They have several words you could use. One word, for example, is invidia. And invidia means envy. And jealousy and envy are connected in a mysterious way. And I find the Latin word invidia pretty interesting, because it contains the word videre, which means to look at, namely, look at someone in bad spirit. And this is a symbol I find fitting what jealousy and envy are. There's a person who is sad or depressed and a bit annoyed because someone else isn't annoyed. Yeah? So envy is, I see someone else being successful, and suddenly I get mad. Or jealousy, I see the other person deals with it with ease and meets all the good-looking young colleagues. And I'm sitting at home thinking, then that might be invidia. So jealousy means I look at something and I am not happy about it. And I'd like to give you a short overview, what is and how can I recognize healthy jealousy and where does it get bad. I have bad news at the start, namely, the lines aren't clear in romantic relationships. Because I've been asked questions like, how should I deal with this? My husband has female friends. Is that okay? Is it not okay? Or my girlfriend, she's always gone a long time and then won't say where she is. Is that still okay? Or am I jealous in an unhealthy way? There isn't a clear line, but some things you can tell. But first, it's important to recognize there is a core of jealousy that is positive. It would be weird if you never were jealous, because jealousy actually means this relationship with you matters to me. The core of relationship means at first, I'm zealous for you. I have a passion for our relationship to stay intact. It would be real strange if all that didn't matter to me. That's the positive side. And the key question is, what results from that feeling? So when in your relationship you sometimes feel, I'm not getting enough, or this isn't fair, then the answer isn't just don't be jealous. But the interesting question is, what do you do with it? And here lies the difference between healthy and unhealthy. Specifically, the main question is, can you enter the relationship with a feeling of jealousy or not? Could you also ask, are you able to say, let's talk about this? Jealousy simply means that the relationship is important to me. Our heart-to-heart matters. I am zealous for it. And because it's important to me, I bring things up. For example, how are you with that pretty new boss or the handsome new student in your class? And then you can talk about it. It becomes a problem when you don't do that. So when you feel irritation and jealousy but follow a different pattern, for example, blaming instead of listening, we can be good at that sometimes. An accusation is a you message. It's not the question, how are you? How are our hearts doing? But a you message is, you're betraying me. You're doing something, I know it. That's more than a feeling. See, the feeling is just, you notice I'm sad, somehow I'm not feeling well. But then come thoughts and we think ourselves into something. I know it, in reality it's like this. And then come accusations. And then comes bitterness. And then it eventually gets strange. See, the problem is every relationship, every person needs trust. But trust can't be forced. You cannot shake someone and say, trust me now. You also can shake anyone and say, you need to be so and so, otherwise I can't trust you. That has the opposite effect and it's terrible. Really, the only thing you can do is you bring it into the relationship and say, see, I feel challenged by such and such. And then you can woo them for trust. You can say, this relationship is really important to me. I would like to stay in conversation with you. I would like to hear if everything is okay. Because sometimes our jealousy sensors are correct. Maybe you really sense that the relationship is in danger, but not always. Sometimes we just get stuck in something. And in the end, the real question is, can we learn from this together, grow from it, in order to move with trust or not? Because there's the opposite of trust, and that is control. And I would really advise you against that. Control kills love. You can't keep the person you want to control close to your heart. It's either control or love. If you try to control them, you lose their heart. And here jealousy gets truly toxic if you start spying on them or writing down suspicions. And the other says, no, there wasn't anything, but I don't believe you. And then I read your diaries and look under the bed and hire a private detective and put cameras everywhere. You might have complete control in the end, but you lost the heart. I mean, who loves a person that behaves towards them like a spy or a head teacher? Control kills love. And that's so sad because your desire, your zeal is actually for the relationship. And that's the mean part of jealousy. Because jealousy is insatiable and deadly. It means the same jealousy that leads you to care about the relationship and fight for it can also bring about the death of the relationship. And that's why I want to now share more in part 2 about the truly destructive dynamic of jealousy and envy. Envy and jealousy are relationship killers, even though the core intent is absolutely human and understandable. And we'll have to deal with how can we now go a step deeper. Why do we humans have jealousy? Why do we get jealous as humans? Why do we compare ourselves with others? And I promise you, if you truly let yourself ask this question, it goes deep to your substance. It's relatively deep. Can you say that? Relatively deep? See, the question to ask here is, how can something that starts from a positive place turn so negative? I mean, originally, it's about zeal for the relationship, for these old words, zealous or kinea. It's a zeal thing. How could it get so twisted? It's funny, in the Old Testament, God is also called a jealous God, but in a positive sense. So he is zealous. He says, this relationship matters to me. How do we people manage to take this positive thing and make it so weird? Where did things go wrong? I'll give you another definition of jealousy, and for that I'll tell you a little story. It goes like this. Somebody walks on foot through a foggy forest and looks at the landscape. And they've been walking for several kilometers already, he's tired. And then a bike passes him, and the pedestrian thinks, wow, I'd like a bike like that too. Then I'd be faster, what a cool bike. Well, I'm a bit jealous. But the biker doesn't think, wow, I have a great bike. Because he sees a hipster with a cool modern e-bike and thinks, now that's the real bike. Next to that, my bike looks like nothing. So embarrassing. What kind of bike is this? I can't let people see me like this. One moment he loves his bike, and the next he goes, this is the worst bike you could ever imagine. But it's not like the guy with the super cool hipster bike feels good about himself because he gets passed by a car and it's a Mercedes. And he's like, look at this guy, you need to be like them. All the girls must be at his feet with this Mercedes. While the biker thinks, if only I could afford a car, I'd be somebody. But the Mercedes driver doesn't feel so great because he suddenly is passed on the freeway by someone else. By a red Porsche 911 Carrera. And he thinks, to drive a car like that, and I'd be a self-made man. But that guy's been driving his Carrera for 5-6 years already, and he has a colleague. And one evening they make plans to get drinks, and the colleague drives up with his yellow Lamborghini. And the Porsche driver cries himself to sleep that night. He feels like the biggest loser. He thinks, I'm so poor, a nobody, I will die a lonely, miserable death. Well, maybe not that extreme. Now you could think that the Lamborghini driver thinks he's great, but no, because in his department where the Lamborghini driver started working, his boss works, and he doesn't drive cars at all, but flies a private jet. And the Lamborghini driver thinks, well, I'm lower middle class with my Lamborghini, it's okay, it's not that great. But he can fly anytime to wherever he likes, off to Berlin or Paris or Moscow. Now you could think that the guy in the private jet feels great, but that's not the case, because one day he goes on a business trip and there come these CEOs of the other companies. And they see him get off his propeller plane, and they think, that's cute, but he sees that they landed with a 2-story machine of a private jet. And he thinks, oh man, my life is nothing. I feel so insignificant, and my machine is nothing compared to that superjet. And he has no joy whatsoever. And all his joy about his little private plane is gone. And who's sitting in that big private jet? A stressed manager who thinks, you know what, I so envy those people who don't have this stress, but can just go for a quiet walk in the woods. That's how envy works. Envy makes what you have seem like it's not worth anything anymore, because you feel like someone else has more. And it steals your joy and sucks it out. It's so toxic. Jealousy, too, when it gets unhealthy, robs your joy of the relationship because you're only looking, where could something be hiding? Where could something bad be? In preparation for today, I ran into a text from the year 250 AD. And it was written in Carthage. I visited Carthage a few years ago. It's in Tunisia. Today only ruins remain, but it was a world metropolis in ancient times. And in Carthage there lived a man named Cyprian. Cyprian of Carthage was an early church teacher. And he wrote a letter or a book called De Celo et Livore about envy and jealousy. And I was absolutely overwhelmed when I read what he wrote. I thought he could have written it today, 250 AD in Carthage. This is what he writes. Jealousy inflames to greed because you no longer are satisfied by what is your own when you see another who is richer. So you aren't happy anymore with what you have because the other guy has more. Ambition steers jealousy when you see another who is held in high honor. So someone who gets more honor, you suddenly realize, I'm not happy with my own place. And once someone is in the grips of jealousy, they can't control themselves anymore. And now he says, through jealousy, the band of peace is torn. By it, brotherly love is damaged. By it, truth is twisted and unity broken. By it, one is persuaded to break apart. Now he addresses the topic of the church. Due to making enemies of the priest and bishops, that is, the leaders, in jealousy by complaining that you yourself don't have the position or can't reconcile their dignity with the act of recognizing another as their superior. I've thought to myself, how modern does that sound? Just this idea, I can't stand that someone else is the boss and not me. Look at them. And friends, I'm so driven by how popular and normal envy is for us today. You just have to listen to how people talk about those up there, politicians. Look at them. The politicians or company bosses. You know, what did that boss take away from you by being rich? What part of us is so offended when someone else is successful, that someone else has money, that someone else has a lot of influence? That doesn't mean that something is taken from me because of it. Now, the interesting part of envy is, envy doesn't knock on the door one day and says, you're jealous, and you're like, okay, I'm just a jealous type. No, envy only appears when the fitting opportunity appears. That is, you always feel great as long as you're the best basketball player in your class. Until the moment when another comes along who is better at basketball. And it's no problem to be nice to all people if you're the prettiest in the class. But one day a new blondie shows up and suddenly something comes up in you. Envy is grief and anger about the success of another person. And it's not so easy to be happy about the success of another person. There's a saying, mourn with the mourning ones and laugh with the laughing ones. To cry with those who are crying, that's easy. Oh, these poor refugees and the poor people in Africa and those poor homeless people, so tragic. But as soon as someone is successful, envy waits for its chance. I'll give you 3 characteristics or aspects of envy. Envy sneaks around you and waits for its opportunity. Envy is interesting. Few people will say of themselves, I am a jealous person. Most people will say, no, I'm not jealous, I'm okay. Until that other colleague gets a promotion. By the way, it's the same for religious or spiritual and Christian people. You always play guitar, and it's only to the glory of God, and you enjoy it so much until someone else shows up who plays guitar better than you. And suddenly you hate that person, and you think, how could this be? Who do they think they are, this guy who came along? How dare they enter my territory? Envy is so deep inside of us. And it's so easy to say you aren't jealous if you didn't get the opportunity, when someone else was promoted and not you. And the other mean part is, unlike other bad characteristics such as gluttony, so to eat beyond healthy need or to be cruel, there most people would say, yeah, I know I shouldn't eat so much all the time, I shouldn't be so cruel. Envy has a really annoying aspect to it, that envy feels justified. Because envy has reasons. Otherwise it wouldn't be envy, but another feeling. Envy has facts. Envy says, no, that wasn't fair. I can write you a list. We also know this from our kids. That kid got 3 pieces of chocolate and I only got 2. And we think ourselves into a corner. Because the point is, of course, the world is never fully fair. You will always find situations where you can add up why that was so unfair. But the third and dramatic part is this situation. I'll elaborate in a moment. The situation of complete justice. It will never come anyway. And this mindset, everything should be fair. And this mindset of envy does something strange to our thinking. I can't really put it into words. I'll take you to a passage from the book of James. It's about exactly that. Because it's a certain wisdom teaching, a certain way of thinking to think in these categories of justice. And James says, but this is not wisdom that comes from above, that is from God, but an earthly one, of the flesh, of the devil. And now comes a really, harsh word. For where there is envy and selfishness, there is division and every evil deed. That's a massive statement. Here it says that once envy has entered life, all other bad deeds are thinkable. Division means that relationships fall apart. Envy is poison to relationships. And envy is like an open door for all other bad things. Envy is at the root of our human dilemmas. And we will now go a step deeper and look at that. One of the most intense statements comes from the Book of Wisdom. That's an ancient Jewish book that is found in some Bibles. In the Book of Wisdom it says in chapter 2, by the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and everyone experiences it who belong to him. It means, here they even say the reason why the world even fell apart is the devil was motivated by envy. Envy is at the root of all of that. Last really, truly uncomfortable element of envy. I'll read another passage from Cyprian of Carthage, because I think it's so great I hope it doesn't bore you. That was written almost 2,000 years ago, and it was the same type of people with the same problems. He says, what nagging worm is it for the soul, what ravaging plague for the thoughts, what destructive rust for the heart, to be jealous of the virtue and happiness of their neighbor. That is, to hate one's own accomplishments, and to turn the goods of the other person to one's own damage, to torture oneself over the success of recognized people, to make the fame of another to your own pain, basically sending henchmen to your own soul and people who torture your thoughts and senses, to then let them tear you to bloody pieces along with the martyrs, to have the deepest depth of your heart torn apart by them with the claws of disfavor. No food can taste good to such a person, no drink will become them anymore. Dreadful, He says, you've invited henchmen, torturing spirits into your heart who will bite away all your joy, gall up everything, ruin it all. And the tragic part of envy is, says Cyprian, that while other sins find an end, envy never finds its end. Now let's say you're upset because you think the taxi driver betrayed you. I must kill him. You kill him, which you hopefully don't. But this murder would then be done. At some point, well, you killed them. And you say, I want to go to bed with a pretty barkeeper and commit adultery. Well, then you go to bed with them, which probably isn't to be recommended, but at least the deed is then done. And Cyprian says, unlike murder and adultery, envy is something that never stops. You're envious of the car, then you're envious of the jet, then you want to have an even better jet. And the whole thing never is satisfied. It eats you like a nagging worm, and it grows deadly. It'll never be full. On the contrary, envy will even prevent you to ever internally feel satisfied by anything.
Have you noticed there are no ads on this channel? This is the only one. There's one reason for that. This channel is funded by donations only. If you want to help us to continue with this work, you find everything about supporting us below in the description. Now enjoy the rest of the video.
Last side note about that, then we'll go a step deeper, almost a bit psychological. We even read at one point in Jesus' trial, so where he's condemned, where Pilate says that he didn't consider the trial to be true because he knew they were only handing Jesus over out of envy. Envy was the reason why they killed Jesus. That's how powerful envy is. Intense. And it's shockingly well received in our world, our social media world, our TV world. And envy grows. And envy waits for its opportunity and feels completely normal and okay. And we live in a world where we consider envy a normal thing. But how did envy and jealousy enter the world? Because you often have to go back to the start of the dilemma to know how it can be healed. Human history is full of envy. The Iliad of Homer already begins with a story of envy. That one guy is jealous because the other guy got the prettier girl as a war trophy, the beautiful Briseis. And in the Bible, the story of envy runs through from A to Z. The first murder to ever occur was a brother murder of Cain and Abel. Classic situation. Cain thinks Abel is the sunshine child. With him, everything goes great, and so he kills his own brother Abel. And then it continues. A few chapters later, we almost have the same thing with Esau and Jacob. Jacob is his mom's favorite, Esau not so much, and then he sells his right of the firstborn and so on. Esau gets incredibly jealous. Classic envy situation between brothers. It continues. Joseph and his brothers. Joseph is the talented, inspired favorite of his father and so on. And the other 11 sons say, what an arrogant ... brother. And they throw him in a pit and sell him to Egypt out of jealousy. And then it goes on. Saul is jealous of David, and one prophet is jealous of the other prophets, and it goes on through the whole Bible. And amazingly often, it's family stories where this starts. And envy and comparing comes from the family and in our childhood history to our lives. Each of us, each of you and me, we have each already had a situation as a kid where you felt like, why not me? Why her? Why him? And we humans have a point in our lives where a sentence enters our life. And unfortunately, it comes into the life of every human because each human has a similar childhood story. Whether it was very dramatic or only mildly bad, it enters our lives, this strange sentence, and it says, "There isn't enough for me." If there's only 3 slices of cake, but 5 people want cake, then you're not going to be as relaxed when one person gets 2 slices. I mean, if there were 100 slices, that would be easy. But in real life, there's often not 100 slices, but things are limited. And sometime the situation of lacking entered your life and my life. Because we humans didn't always get what we needed. And later you get older and say, well, okay, my parents, they didn't know any better. They were poor and didn't have much back then. But that's rationalizing the whole thing in your head. We tend to make things fit our story. But deep down, there's still this pain. Deep down, there's still something like, yeah, that's where that really comes from. And the mean part is, the more you allow yourself to have deep relationships with a person, the more this stuff comes out. With colleagues and others also. But our deepest impressions, our deepest stuff comes out in our intimate relationships, unfiltered. And yes, here also, the whole unhealthy zeal and all that, it plays into this question. What is this really? And I want to show you a book that I saw today. It moved me a lot. In it, a lady, her name is Jana Herzberg, showed her inner journey. You could say a therapeutic journey. And it's called Encounter with God in the Wounded Place. And it's really, really touching. And she confronts this pain in her heart where she realizes, I as a child didn't get what I needed. It's quite something to allow yourself to feel that. And then she goes through a process we humans don't like, and that's the process of grief. When you start to grieve what happens, something can heal. That's the first step. I think it's interesting, in the Psalms there's a lot of grief. In our modern songs, not so much. But in the Psalms, all that has a place. He really lays out all that went wrong. And similarly, this woman paints these pictures as well. And she basically reports or confronts the fact that she never really experienced closeness as a child. Real early, she was put in a baby care back in communist East Germany. And she meets a coldness inside of her, and she asks herself, where does that come from? And then she gets this inner picture of what she would have needed. And this is the picture that really moves me. There's a mother with her child. And on the bottom right it says, that would have been something. It's exactly what every child, every human deeply desires. And it's a desire that never fully goes away because humans are made for connection. Namely, an empathetic, a warm, loving, I'm here for you. And you can either run from that. Often we don't let ourselves feel such feelings deeply. But if you're honest and allow these thoughts and feelings, then you still have the pain or regrets of things where you think, actually, I would have needed something different. Be it from my mom or my dad. Maybe one of the two was never there. or they were physically present but not emotionally. That's the beauty of this picture. You see, the mom isn't only there and in the other room doing something, or dad is there, but there's a heart-to-heart, an intimate bond, just because. Without a you need to or but you should, but I'm here for you. And that, friends, is the love that God wants to love us with, if we let Him. And that's the quality of love that all humans desire, but no humans is capable of fully giving. Because each human still carries this thing around with them deep down. It's never enough. There isn't enough. Normally we don't feel this in daily life. There's a lid over it. It's down there somewhere brewing. We keep the lid on. But that's the deep foundation why envy and jealousy and anger sometimes flare up against the other person. Because looking at those things would hurt quite deeply. But in the end, it's the way to healing, to look at this, to also allow grief about it. Once again, that's the fascinating part about the Psalms. They aren't afraid of spreading their pain and doubt out before God. We humans, especially in the West, very strongly tend to, me too by the way, want to solve everything through our mind. But anything you solve through your head, you solve too quickly. It goes too fast. Anything that went too quick, you solved it with your head. Because there are deep, life-cutting, life-changing processes in order to get there. I'm just saying that because if you think, well, I get it, I know already, need to be such and such way, and being jealous isn't good. Great if you know that in your head and it's a good first step, but you should also know it's only one step. And some things don't go away fast, but only by looking closely at them and through the path of tears and grief. And this pain, it's so important because it also has solidarity with the jealous person. I find that so good. It's easy to say, don't be so jealous and envious. Okay, sure. But we have reasons why we were that way. There's hurt, there are experiences in life which are the cause of it. It would be similar if someone came to you totally upset because someone drove into his car. It doesn't do much good to say, stop complaining, it's just metal. It may be more than metal. Maybe it's the car he uses to get to work every day. Maybe he loves his car and paid all his savings on it. If you don't understand the pain, you'll also never fully heal. If you don't understand the pain, you also can't give the person good advice. The same goes for you too. And sometimes this good advice to yourself, I'll just not be jealous anymore, it stays at the surface, and so it has a little lasting effect. Because we don't take the time to have solidarity with what really happened, also with the hurt person in us, who says, that wasn't okay. I didn't get the intimacy, the attention, or the time, the presence, the safety that I would have needed. And this pain is allowed. And I believe that exactly at this place, God wants to meet you. And I will try to show you this by telling a few beautiful stories. Cyprian of Carthage, once again, let yourself be healed where back then you received your wounds. He writes in his writings 250 AD about envy and jealousy. Let yourself be healed where back then you received your wounds. And the story in the Bible works the same way too. It goes back to the beginnings. Now, really important, when I tell the story of Cain and Abel, the good part is you can draw something from it regardless if you believe it happened this way or not. That's the wonderful part. You can only see it as a symbolic, a mythical fairy tale. But you will see it still makes a difference in you. I say that to cut short many discussions. How was that in the Garden of Eden? Haven't humans existed millions of years already? We can completely bypass that discussions. The stories, even if you only see them as a symbolic, tell something incredibly deep about your story. Because the thinking is, we need to go back to the origins to see when the problem started. And these old stories from the Bible in the Garden of Eden start with this sentence, "There isn't enough for me." Because the two humans, Adam and Eve, actually they're doing great. They're in a garden where everything is plentiful, full of great fruits and jewels and... It's easy, it's warm and close and beautiful. And still, simply because we're humans. They open themselves up for a voice, and then the voice in this story is spoken by the snake. But even if a snake never spoke to you before, you still know this voice. The voice says, "It sounds too good to be true." You know, someone could only ever be kind to you, always give you what you want, and there still would be something in us humans that says, "Well, I don't know. That's how it is. That's how we are." And this voice says, "Adam and Eve, there isn't enough for you. It's not true at all. It's all a rigged game. It's a foul number going on there. You aren't getting the best fruit, because then your eyes will be opened." And the opposite is true. Adam and Eve eat from the fruit, and again the point isn't if it was a kiwi or maracuja or an apple. They eat the fruit of there isn't enough. They eat this idea. They eat this envious, lying, basic idea, which you also know. And it comes into them and they digest it. And Eve even shares it with the husband, and he's like, "Sure, I'll gladly take some," just like we would do, because envy is contagious, and you can eat envy or let it eat you up inside. And envy comes across real rational. It feels fair, intelligent. Then our eyes will open, but it brings death. And they are naked and realize, "Wow, I don't feel good at all. I am ashamed for how I am." That's the story of the Garden of Eden and how it continues with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. I already told you that part. But then the Bible also tells another story. And like in a rescue mission, God says, "Dear humans, I know this is your problem, but I have a counter plan." And the first person God starts this counter plan with at a large scale is Abraham. And I find it fantastic. He speaks to Abraham and simply says, "Go out from your land into the land that I will show you." And Abraham says, "Hey, my problem is take over a land. I don't even have a child. I am barren. There's not enough for me. Not even one child." And God takes him out of the tent one night. "Come outside. Come out of the tent. It's nighttime. And in the desert you can see the stars especially well then." And God says to Abraham, "Look up." And Abraham, "Wow." And God says, "Look here. You will have more descendants than these stars." And the first thing, if you will, that God reveals to Abraham is, with me there is incredible abundance, 1,000 times greater than what you can imagine. Even if you say there isn't enough, and I don't even have a child and my wife is already old, God says you have no idea what I can do. And the only thing I want is your trust. So he courts his trust. And the annoying part is Abraham would have all the reason in the world to say, "Forget it, I'm over 80. But God courts his trust, because love courts trust. Love and control exclude each other. It's about wooing. And in the Bible, it's all connected. The story with the stars, it appears again in the same book which I quoted to you earlier, where it said that envy and jealousy are so bad because every evil deed stems from them. And 2 chapters earlier, James references, I think, the story of the stars. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of the stars, with whom there is no change nor darkness. I find this expression, Father of the Stars, so beautiful. Like as if even the stars had a dad. Isn't that great? And just like many stars, where we see light now, but in reality they have gone out millions of years ago, just like the stars shine even millions of years later with their light for us. So James says, so the Father of lights is without change. Okay, in him it's never dark, the lights never go out, the electricity won't be scarce, never a water damage, and his favor will never turn, like with humans. One day you're nice, tomorrow not. Today mom and dad are nice, tomorrow they are stressed and have no time for me. With him there is no change. He is the Father of the heavenly lights. And it's the same theme over the whole work of Jesus. Jesus appears and his core message is that we are children of God. And how he defines children of God. He showed in his own life. The first miracle Jesus does is at the wedding of Cana. There's a huge, completely irrational amount of wine. Clearly too much wine. And then Jesus gives his first speech. It's totally crazy. In Matthew 5-7, the Sermon on the Mount, here Jesus says things that make no sense to our envy ear. He says, if anyone tries to take something from you, let him take it. And if someone does evil to you, then you should forgive them, because the Father is the same way. He lets it rain over the righteous and the unrighteous. But then Jesus also says what the secret of that is. He says, don't worry. Look at the lilies of the field. They do not sow or reap, yet they are more beautiful than you. And look at the birds of the air. They neither sow or reap, but not one of them falls to the ground without your Father in heaven being sovereign over it. It means the world Jesus lives in is a world of there's always enough. And the kingdom, there's always enough. So a kingdom of total provision and fullness. This kingdom, Jesus calls it the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God. It's the kingdom where there's always enough. And he invites people to discover it. And to also live from a place of there's always enough. That's what Jesus means with the term child of God. And the invitation he gives us is, if this is a person, he invites us into a new kingdom and a new space, a new environment, namely founded on this, there is always enough. It's a space of fullness and being justified. So child of God means regardless of what your earthly family and your upbringing or ethnicity, your origin is, where maybe a lot goes wrong, where you maybe didn't always get enough, where you even maybe had material poverty. This is the message of Jesus. He puts you in a space of fullness and being justified.
Raum der Fülle und Berechtigung.
Justification is a strong word. Not only because there's people who feel like they had no right to be born, like the third wheel, unwanted, it happens, but deeper, because he says if God gives you the right to exist, well, who can take that away? The idea is, what person should make you afraid now? And friends, it's very easy here. Of course, it's easy to only talk about this stuff with your mind and to say, that's nice, see, there's always enough, how lovely. But in the end, you can only experience it yourself. And here we might be on a path to experience this in a deeper way. But that's the offer Jesus wants to make to us, to bring us home from our deep prison of there's never enough, and from lacking and grief, and to set us on a foundation of actually there is enough. There is a Father after all, and there's this warm, motherly, tender and present love. And not just in your head or a holy book or if you get it all right, but as something you can be grounded on, that won't go away, and you don't have to earn, but it's there. You can feel it in your body. Many of these things are stored in the body, these experiences of lacking. And all around is a protective area where God says, even when you have lack, even when your father and mother forget you, the Lord takes you in, as it says in a psalm. And a space of fullness and justification that says, you're allowed to be, you belong. You're also allowed to be needy. You can also have expectations. You can also need stuff. You can also be impossible sometimes. We're all sometimes impossible. And it's a place of justification to be yourself. And this space is the core thing that will defeat envy and jealousy, not just I should not be jealous anymore. And that's the last thing I want to show you. I only truly realized this the first time today. In the Bible, when someone is really jealous, you know what happens next? What do you think? God comes to them and speaks gently to their heart. Just like with Cain. Cain already got the weapon. He already thinks, I'll strike that guy down, that Abel, because he's so jealous. And now you could say God is sharpening his fiery arrows to strike down this vile sinner. Instead, we read in Genesis, often they say the Old Testament God is somehow evil. Okay, sure. Take a closer look. The Lord spoke to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your face downcast? It's like when you talk to my kids. Why do you look so sad? Why are you looking at the ground? Come talk to me. Is it not true that if you do right, it will be lifted, so your face will look up? But if you don't do the right thing, sin is crouching at your door, and it will desire you, but you should rule over it. Isn't that powerful? It's like a teacher who says, I know it sucks right now. I can understand your sister is much better at sports than you. Or your colleague was promoted and you weren't. I know you have every reason to be upset now. I love this about God. He doesn't just say, pull yourself together, you're just being stupid. He says, it hurts right now, doesn't it? You're upset, aren't you? I get it. But don't entertain all the thoughts that come to you now. Instead, rule over them. So he's actually strengthening him. He says, hey, you actually have a foundation on which you stand. You can also rule. He calls Cain, who is about to kill his brother, to be a ruler. He says, you're not the victim here. Lord over this. He trusts him with the situation. And you know what? He trusts you with situations where you could get jealous. And he says to you now, rule. Rule. Don't come under every stupid thought that comes, but rule. Sin is crouching at your door. It wants to devour you. It grows deadly. You won't get out of it, so rule. I love this about God, and we see the same thing in the New Testament. Once the disciples get jealous, the disciples argue about who is the greatest. What does Jesus do? He takes them aside and talks to them and says, you know, the rich people of this world, the rulers, they oppress each other, but it shouldn't be so with you. And for me, the most moving part, there's this famous story where Jesus says, the Heavenly Father is like a father who had two sons. The one gambles everything away, returns, and the father is full of mercy. And the other son, the older son, he's totally jealous. He's out in the field and goes into a classic jealousy spiral. He says, "I've been here so many years and not once has my father ever thrown a party for me." And then this guy shows up, Nvidia, and he looks at him and says, "Sure, let's throw a huge party. Look at them, eating and drinking excessively." And he's so jealous. And now God could say, "Yeah, we're celebrating a party. Those jealous people should just repent and then come join." But instead, in this love and gentleness, the father notices at the party someone is still missing. He notices it the same way as when he saw the prodigal son missing, and goes out to the field and talks to him and says to him, "My child, everything that is mine is yours." And he invites him, "Rejoice." And he doesn't say, "Don't be jealous," but he says, "See, there's enough for you. There's even more than enough. Everything I have is yours." That's how God speaks to the heart of this person who is stuck in jealousy. Here again, Cyprian of Carthage. Something will only change in you if you've begun to be what you weren't before. So what he says is, through conversion, you became a child of God. And now all you have to do is live out of that. Easier said than done, but it's really how it is. Or in Peter's epistle it says, "Now lay down all evil and deceit, all hypocrisy and envy and all gossip." And the word to lay down comes from the metaphor of clothing. So he says, like, you're in a new situation now, so you can take off these old rags. They don't suit you anymore. Take them off. And I want to speak that over you. We have to speak this over each other continuously. Depending on what your story is, you might be more vulnerable in this area. But you can lay down envy and gossip, which comes from that meaning talking bad behind someone's back. You can lay that down. You don't need to stay under that. And sometimes you have to lay it down again and again and again until it doesn't come back so quickly. It's a battle, but a good one. And again, the thing that dissolves envy in the end is love. The thing to dissolve envy and jealousy is that you run out with your desire for love and your needs and your grief to God and say to Him, "God, come love me and fill my places of lacking." I don't promise that everything will be fine right away, but I promise that it's the right way. It's so good how Paul writes, "Love is long-suffering. Love is kind. It does not envy. Love doesn't boast. It doesn't make itself great. It isn't jealous." It's the same word, zelote, in Greek. Love is not jealous. It doesn't envy. And that's why Jesus can call us in the Sermon on the Mount to an absolutely radically different lifestyle. Last tip Jesus gives us, well, he says, you should give generously, you should forgive generously, be without worry, pray for your enemies, you should honor others. Those are the cures of a mindset of envy and jealousy, which means if you have a problem with that, when someone gets honored and you always think, if only someone honored me, you know what the antidote is? Honor others. Don't wait any longer for someone to finally notice you. You go notice others. If you have a problem with greed and notice it always nags at me that I don't earn as much as I would like, give money away generously. Because you'll act in a different spirit and it will dissolve this. Love dissolves envy. When you notice you're full of bitterness in your thoughts, do what Jesus says. Pray for your enemies and forgive them. Do good to those who hate you, says Jesus. Give generously and live yourself in a lifestyle of generosity. Sometimes you need to act as if. Sometimes you need to act as if you were a child of God. Sometimes you need to act as if there was always enough. Sometimes you need to act as if you were in a room of fullness and justification. And the more you act like it, the more you realize those are actually the clothes that fit me. That's actually the lifestyle that suits me, and it's true. Sometimes you need to take a step of faith out of this prison of envy and jealousy and put on a new behavior. Because love doesn't envy. Love doesn't gossip. And love is what you're in the end called to, what you are in the deepest and final sense. Jealousy, envy, a huge topic. We started with how it can look practically in our relationships. But you see, in the end, it's about incredibly deep topics. If you want to know more how you can build up this relationship with God, how you can deepen it in all this, then I invite you to click on the other videos on this channel or to subscribe. I'd be happy if you get on your way of discovering for yourself how your relationship with God could look like. And I wish for you that your life would gain depth and fullness and joy and richness and all goodness because of it. Best wishes.